An American teacher, an Arab tycoon, and an unexpected destiny. When Sarah meets Amir, the attraction is instant, but behind the glamour lie secrets that could change her life forever. Between love and danger, she must decide: follow her heart, or flee before it's too late. The sun shone through the enormous windows of the Ritz-Carlton in New York, where an international education conference was about to begin. Sarah nervously adjusted her name tag on her simple but elegant blazer. The best outfit she could afford on her teacher's salary. Her fingers unconsciously ran through her brown hair, trying to tame a few rebellious strands that insisted on escaping from her improvised bun. "Take a deep breath, Sarah," she murmured to herself, observing the comings and goings of important people in the main lobby. She was there only as an organization assistant, a favor her friend Mark, the event coordinator, had asked for. "It's just another day of work," she repeated mentally, although she knew it was far from her routine as a teacher in Boston. The Italian marble under her feet reflected the lights of the immense crystal chandeliers, creating a spectacle of sparkles that made her feel even more out of place. Executives in impeccable suits, renowned university professors, and education sector businessmen circulated through the environment with a naturalness that she secretly envied. That's when he entered. The buzz of the room seemed to diminish, as if the very atmosphere recognized his presence. Tall, with striking features and a navy blue suit that certainly cost more than her annual salary, he emanated an aura of power that made Sarah involuntarily hold her breath. His eyes, deep and mysterious, swept the room with a mixture of boredom and curiosity. "That's Amir Al-Rashid," Mark whispered, materializing at her side. "One of the biggest investors in educational technology from the Middle East. They say he rarely appears at public events." Sarah nodded mechanically, unable to look away. There was something hypnotic about the way Amir moved, greeting some people with calculated gestures, his soft accent occasionally echoing through the room. "Earth to Sarah!" Mark snapped his fingers in front of her face. "I need you to organize the name tags for the next session's speakers, and please try not to drool too much while admiring our illustrious guest." Blushing furiously, Sarah headed to the registration desk. She focused on organizing the name tags in alphabetical order, a simple task that would help her regain control of her thoughts. But fate, that incorrigible prankster, had other plans. "Excuse me," a deep melodic voice made her freeze. "I believe my name tag should be there." Sarah slowly looked up, her heart almost stopping as she met Amir Al-Rashid's intense gaze fixed on her. Up close, he was even more impressive. His olive skin contrasted with his perfectly white teeth, revealed by an enigmatic smile. "Ah, yes, of course," she stammered, her hands trembling slightly as she searched for his name. "Mr. Al-Rashid, here it is." "Please call me Amir." He took the name tag, his fingers gently brushing against hers. "And you are?" "Sarah." "Sarah." "Thompson," she replied, surprised by the sudden firmness in her voice. "Sarah," he repeated, savoring each syllable as if it were a sacred word. A name as beautiful as its owner. She felt the blush rise from her neck to her cheeks. It was the kind of pickup line that would normally make her roll her eyes, but there was something in the way he looked at her that seemed sincere, almost vulnerable. "Thank you," she replied simply, trying to maintain a professional air. "I hope you enjoy the conference." "I'm sure I'll enjoy it much more now," he smiled, a mischievous glint in his dark eyes. "Will you be present at the lecture on educational technology?" "Yes, I'm helping with the organization." "Excellent. Perhaps we can continue this conversation during the coffee break." Before Sarah could respond, a small crowd of businessmen approached, all wanting the attention of the mysterious Arab millionaire. Amir gave her one last meaningful look before being dragged into a series of greetings and business conversations. Sarah watched him walk away, her heart beating at an irregular rhythm. This was madness. Men like Amir Al-Rashid weren't interested in ordinary teachers. She was imagining things, projecting her own romantic fantasies onto a casual encounter. However, throughout the morning lecture, she couldn't concentrate. Her eyes stubbornly sought Amir's elegant figure in the audience. Occasionally, their gazes would cross, and she felt an electric current run down her spine. The coffee break arrived faster than she expected. Sarah was helping to organize the beverage table when she felt a familiar presence behind her. "A coffee, please." Amir's voice sounded close to her ear, making her almost drop the thermos. "Black, no sugar. Like your eyes." She turned around, finding him much closer than she expected. His perfume was an intoxicating blend of sandalwood and spices, bringing to mind images of exotic markets and starry nights in the desert. "Mr. Al-Rashid, Amir," he gently corrected her. "And before you say you're busy working, I've already asked your friend Mark for permission to steal you for a few minutes. He was very understanding." Sarah shot a death glare at Mark, who was observing the scene from afar with an amused smile on his face. Her friend merely shrugged and gestured for her to go. "Shall we take a walk through the gardens?" Amir offered, his arm in a gallant gesture. "The day is too beautiful to stay cooped up in here." Against her better judgment, Sarah accepted. The hotel gardens were a small oasis in the heart of New York, with murmuring fountains and perfectly manicured rose beds. They walked in silence for a few moments, until they found a discreet bench under a pergola covered with wisteria. "So, Sarah," Amir began, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "tell me about yourself." "There's not much to tell," she replied, suddenly aware of the simplicity of her life. "I'm a teacher in Boston. I came to New York just to help with the conference." "On the contrary," he gently interrupted her, "there's something about you that intrigues me deeply. An authenticity that is rare in my world." Sarah laughed nervously. "Authenticity is just a polite way of saying I'm too simple for this environment." "No," Amir took her hand, his warm fingers sending shivers up her arm. "Authenticity is exactly what I meant. You have no idea how refreshing it is to meet someone who isn't trying to impress me or get something in return." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt herself drowning in their dark depths. There was something there, a mixture of desire and melancholy, that left her intrigued. "Why me?" she asked, before she could stop herself. "There must be dozens of women more. Suitable for my what?" He smiled, a touch of bitterness in his voice. "My status? My fortune. It's exactly because you think like this that you're different, Sarah. You see me as a person, not as a walking bank account." The distant sound of voices brought them back to reality. The coffee break was ending, and they needed to return. "Have dinner with me tonight?" Amir asked, or rather declared. It wasn't quite an invitation, but it also didn't quite reach the level of an order. "Let me get to know you better, away from all this social circus." Sarah knew she should refuse. Her life was in Boston, not in New York. Men like Amir al-Rashid didn't fall in love with teachers. This could only end in disappointment. But when she opened her mouth to say no, what came out was, "Yes, I'd love to." The smile that lit up Amir's face was dazzling, but Sarah couldn't help but notice a shadow that quickly passed through his eyes. It was so fast that she thought she had imagined it. They returned to the conference room, where Mark was waiting for her with an expression that mixed concern and amusement. "Be careful," he whispered when Amir walked away. "Men like that always have secrets." Sarah nodded distractedly, her eyes following Amir's elegant figure as he mingled again with the other guests. Her friend was right, of course, but for the first time in her life, she was willing to take a risk. Little did she know that this seemingly casual encounter at the Ritz-Carlton would be just the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The secrets Amir carried were much deeper and more complex than she could imagine, and the fairy tale that seemed to be unfolding had the potential to turn into something very different from what she dreamed of. The reflection in the mirror of the luxurious hotel bathroom didn't seem real. Sarah adjusted for the 10th time the black dress that Mark had helped her buy in a hurry at a nearby boutique. "It's an investment," he had said, ignoring her protests about the exorbitant price. "Besides, you can pay in installments." Her fingers trembled slightly as she applied the red lipstick. Her hair, now loose in soft waves, framed her face in a way she wasn't used to. The discreet makeup enhanced her features without seeming exaggerated. It was still her, but a more sophisticated version, more New York. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Miss Thompson." The concierge's voice sounded from the other side. "Mr. Al-Rashid is waiting for you in the lobby." "I'll be right down," she replied, her voice firmer than she felt. The path to the elevator seemed endless. Each step in her new heels echoed through the corridor like a reminder of how far out of her comfort zone she was. In the elevator mirror, Sarah rehearsed smiles, trying to look natural, sophisticated, worthy of the man waiting for her. The doors opened to the lobby, and there he was. Amir had exchanged the business suit from the conference for an impeccable tuxedo that made him look even more imposing. His gaze, when he saw her, had an intensity that made her heart race. "You look stunning," he said simply, taking her hand and placing a soft kiss on her fingers. "Thank you," Sarah responded, mentally thanking Mark for the dress. "You look very elegant too." Amir smiled, but there was something in his eyes, a fleeting shadow that Sarah couldn't quite decipher. "Shall we? I have a surprise for you." A black limousine was waiting for them at the hotel entrance. The driver, a discreet man in a dark suit, opened the door without saying a word. Sarah felt like she was entering a movie where every detail seemed carefully orchestrated. "Where are we going?" she asked when the car started gliding through the streets of New York. "Do you trust me?" Amir answered with another question, his eyes shining enigmatically in the car's dim light. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Did she trust him? She barely knew him. All she knew was based on a few hours of conversation and a magnetic attraction she couldn't explain. Still. "Yes," she answered, surprised by her own certainty. Amir's smile widened, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Then close your eyes." Sarah obeyed, feeling the car make several turns. Amir's perfume, that intoxicating blend of sandalwood and spices, seemed to fill the entire space. After what seemed like an eternity, the car stopped. "Don't open them yet," Amir asked, helping her out of the car. The New York night air caressed her face, bringing with it a mixture of aromas she couldn't fully identify. He guided her for a few meters, his large, warm hands holding hers gently. Sarah could hear the sound of their footsteps echoing, as if they were in a large, empty space. "Now," Amir whispered in her ear, "you can open them." Sarah opened her eyes and almost lost her breath. They were in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the majestic New York landmark, completely empty except for a single, elegantly set table in the center of the main hall. Thousands of candles created a magical ambience, their lights dancing on the marble structures and paintings. How did you manage this?" she asked, amazed. "Let's say I have some friends in the city," Amir responded vaguely. "Do you like it?" It's unbelievable," Sarah slowly turned, absorbing every detail of the monumental space. "But it must have been an immense effort to organize all this in such a short time." "For you, it's worth it," he replied, guiding her to the table. A waiter materialized silently, serving champagne in crystal flutes. The meal that followed was a parade of elaborate dishes, each more impressive than the last. A string quartet played softly in a corner, their melodies echoing through the grand space. The conversation flowed naturally, covering various topics: education, art, travel, dreams. "Tell me about your childhood," Amir asked at one point, his eyes fixed on her with a disturbing intensity. Sarah hesitated. Her story was too simple compared to his world. "There's not much to tell. I grew up in Boston, only child of teacher parents. I always knew I wanted to follow the same path." It must have been good to have that certainty. There was a note of melancholy in his voice. "To have the freedom to choose your own path." "And you?" Sarah risked asking. "What was your childhood like?" A shadow passed over Amir's face. "Complicated," he answered after a pause. "When you're born into a family like mine, your choices are rarely your own." Before Sarah could explore that subject further, Amir abruptly stood up, extending his hand to her. "Dance with me." The quartet, as if receiving an invisible signal, began to play a soft waltz. Sarah let herself be guided across the hall in Amir's arms, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. He was an excellent dancer, leading her with a natural grace that made her feel as light as a feather. "You are dangerous, Sarah Thompson," Amir murmured close to her ear. Me? Why? Because you make me want things I can't have. His voice had a tone of sadness that she didn't fully understand. Sarah moved away slightly to look into his eyes. What do you mean by that? In response, Amir pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a soft, almost hesitant kiss. Sarah felt her world spin, all the glamour of the environment disappearing before the sensation of his lips on hers, the warmth of his body, the perfume that enveloped her. When they separated, there was a vulnerability in Amir's gaze that she hadn't seen before. For a moment, the mask of the powerful businessman fell, revealing something deeper, more complex. "I should let you go," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "It would be the right thing to do." "And if I don't want to go?" Sarah responded, surprising herself with her boldness. Amir studied her for a long moment, as if waging an internal battle. Finally, a sad smile appeared on his lips. "Then we'll have to see where this leads us, won't we?" The night continued like a dream. More dances, more champagne, whispered conversations under the starry ceiling of the Metropolitan. But now there was a new tension in the air, a mixture of desire and apprehension that Sarah couldn't fully decipher. When the limousine dropped her back at the hotel, it was almost dawn. Amir accompanied her to her room door, his fingers intertwined with hers as if he didn't want to let her go. "Have dinner with me tomorrow?" he asked, his dark eyes shining in the dim light of the corridor. "The conference ends tomorrow," Sarah reminded him. "My flight back to Boston is the day after. Then we'll have to make the most of the time we have left," Amir replied, leaning in to kiss her again. But when Sarah entered her room and closed the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting into something much bigger and more complex than a simple travel romance. Amir's enigmatic words, his hesitations, the moments of sadness that occasionally crossed his gaze. There was much more to this story than she could see. Lying on her bed, replaying the events of the night, Sarah wondered if she should listen to the warnings her instinct was trying to give her. But Amir's perfume was still on her skin, the taste of his kisses on her lips, and reason seemed too distant an advisor to be heard at that moment. On her phone, a message from Mark flashed. "How was it? I need details." Sarah smiled but didn't respond immediately. How to explain a night that seemed to have come straight out of a fairy tale? How to describe the feeling of being in the arms of a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders? Finally, she typed only, "It was magical. But there's something else, something I can't understand." Mark's response came instantly. "Be careful, S. The more magical it seems, the more attention you need to pay." Sarah knew her friend was right. But as she watched the first lights of the New York dawn paint the sky pink and gold, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change completely. For better or worse, only time would tell. The last day of the conference passed like a blur for Sarah. Her hands moved automatically, organizing papers and assisting speakers, but her mind was elsewhere, reliving every moment of the previous night at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Occasionally, her eyes would meet Ryan's across the conference hall, and that silent connection made her heart race. "Earth to Sarah." Mark snapped his fingers in front of her face for the third time that morning. "You're completely in the clouds today." "Sorry," she mumbled, blushing slightly. It's just that the charming Arab prince has you under his spell," he completed, rolling his eyes, but there was genuine concern in his voice. "Look, S, I know it's none of my business, but, she encouraged him, knowing her friend couldn't hold back whatever was bothering him. Mark looked around to make sure no one was listening. "I did some research on Ryan al-Rashid last night. There's something strange about him." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean, strange?" "Well, for starters, there's very little information available about him, considering his position. No photos at social events, no mention of previous relationships. It's like he lives in the shadows, you know." "Maybe he's just private," Sarah defended, but an uneasy feeling began to settle in her stomach. "There's more," Mark continued, hesitant. "I found some articles in Arabic, used an online translator, talking about the al-Rashid family. Apparently there's a lot of pressure for Ryan to get married soon. Something about family traditions and expectations from the company's board. So I have directors. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Why are you telling me this? Because I care about you. Mark held her hands. And because I don't want you to get hurt. Men like him, they live in a different world from ours, S. A world with its own rules and very specific expectations. Before Sarah could respond, her cell phone vibrated with a message from Ryan. Can I see you now? It's important. I need to go, she told Mark, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. So I see, Mark called out as she was already walking away. Just be careful, okay? Sarah found Ryan in a small winter garden on the 3rd floor of the hotel. He had his back to the entrance, hands in the pockets of his impeccable suit, observing New York through the glass panels. There was a visible tension in his shoulders that she hadn't noticed before. Ryan? She called softly. He turned and Sarah immediately realized that something was wrong. His eyes, usually so controlled, revealed a storm of emotions. Sarah? He took 2 steps in her direction, then stopped, as if holding himself back. We need to talk. Those 3 words made her heart clench. About what? About us. About possibilities. He ran his hand through his hair, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture for someone always so composed. My family is coming to New York. They'll be here tonight. Sarah felt the weight of those words. Why? Because they found out about you, he answered, his voice laden with an emotion she couldn't fully identify. Somehow, they learned about our meetings. And that's it bad? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Ryan finally approached, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm but trembled slightly. It's complicated. My family, they have very specific expectations about who I should be involved with. There are traditions, obligations. So that's it? Sarah tried to pull her hands away, but Ryan held them tighter. You're going to tell me it was fun while it lasted, but that you need to move on with your life? No. The vehemence in his voice surprised her. No, Sarah, it's exactly the opposite. He pulled her closer, his eyes fixed on hers with an almost frightening intensity. I want you to stay, to cancel your return to Boston. I want you to marry me. Sarah felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. What? I know it sounds crazy, Ryan continued quickly. We've only known each other for 2 days. But there's something between us, something real. You feel it too, don't you? She did. It was impossible to deny the connection that existed between them, that magnetic attraction that went beyond the physical. But, Ryan, you barely know me. I barely know you. How can you be sure? Because for the first time in my life, he interrupted her, I found someone who makes me want to be truthful, someone who sees beyond the fortune, the name, the appearances. There was a plea in his eyes that made Sarah's heart ache. But your family... My family will have to accept it, he said, though something in his voice sounded as if he didn't quite believe it himself. You're exactly what I need, Sarah. Maybe you're what we all need. That last phrase sounded strange to Sarah's ears, as if there was a hidden meaning she couldn't grasp. But before she could question it, Ryan continued, I know I'm asking a lot. I'm asking you to leave your life, your job, everything you know. But I can give you the world in return, Sarah. To anything you dream of. It's not about that, she protested. It's not about money or luxury. Then what is it about? He asked softly, his hands framing her face. What do you need to say yes? Sarah closed her eyes, feeling his touch on her skin, the scent that had already become so familiar. It was madness, complete madness, and yet, I need honesty, she finally answered, opening her eyes to face him. Total and complete honesty, Ryan. No secrets, no half-truths. Something passed across his face, fear, guilt, so quickly that she almost missed it. You'll have it, he promised, but there was a note in his voice that Sarah couldn't fully decipher. Your family, they're coming tonight? Yes, Ryan confirmed. My mother, Olivia, and my uncle, Kevin. They're intense. But if you accept my proposal, if you agree to marry me, I promise I'll do everything to protect you. Protect her. The choice of that specific word made Sarah frown. What exactly would you need to protect me from, Ryan? He hesitated for a moment too long before answering. From the expectations, from the traditions, from the weight that comes with the Al-Rashid name. But Sarah had the distinct impression that there was more, much more, that he wasn't saying. Mark's words echoed, in her mind mixed with her own doubts and fears. I need time, she finally said. I need to think about all this. Of course, he gently released her hands. But we don't have much time. Tomorrow night I need to give an answer to my family, and that answer will change the fate of many people, not just ours. As they descended from the winter garden in silence, Sarah felt the weight of Ryan's revelations on her shoulders. There was more, much more than he was telling her. She could feel it. But was she prepared to discover the whole truth? And more importantly, was she prepared for the consequences of that discovery? The night seemed endless as Sarah tossed and turned in her hotel bed. Ryan's revelations spun in her mind like a kaleidoscope of doubts and possibilities. The digital clock on the nightstand marked 3:47 a.m. when she finally gave up trying to sleep. Putting on the hotel robe, she walked to the window. New York slept under a blanket of soft lights, so different from the turmoil that seethed in her chest. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Mark. Still awake? How did you guess? She replied. Because I know you. Want company? 15 minutes later, the two friends were sitting on the small sofa in Sarah's room, sharing a box of chocolates that Mark had brought. So, he began, are you going to tell me what happened after dinner with the Arab Cruella de Vil? Sarah couldn't help a small smile at the reference. Ryan told me some things, about him, about the family. But not everything, Mark completed. It wasn't a question. No, she sighed. There's something bigger happening, Mark. Something that involves his uncle, Kevin. Apparently he made some kind of proposal that could change everything. What kind of proposal? I don't know. Ryan didn't go into details, but a firm knock on the door interrupted her. The two friends looked at each other, surprised. Who could it be at this hour? Sarah cautiously got up and peeked through the peephole. Her heart almost stopped when she saw who was on the other side. It's Ryan's uncle, she whispered to Mark. Kevin Al-Rashid. What? How does he know where you are? Before Sarah could answer, another knock, more insistent this time. Ms. Walker, a deep voice called out in English. We need to talk. It's about Ryan. Sarah looked at Mark, who made a negative gesture with his head. But something in Kevin's voice, a contained urgency, made her ignore her friend's silent warning. When she opened the door, Kevin Al-Rashid entered like a force of nature, tall and imposing like Ryan, but with graying hair at the temples and eyes that seemed to assess everything with surgical precision. He paused for a moment upon seeing Mark. We need to talk in private, he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of my friend, Sarah responded, surprising herself with her firmness. Kevin studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. Very well. Perhaps it's better to have a witness after all. He sat down in one of the armchairs as if he were in his own office, indicating that Sarah and Mark should do the same. Mrs. Walker, he began, his voice controlled. How much do you know about our family? Only what Ryan told me, she answered cautiously. And how much do you know about Ryan's condition? Sarah felt her face heat up. He told me about his difficulties. Difficulties, Kevin repeated with a humorless smile. That's a delicate way of putting it. But do you know why he has these difficulties? He said it's psychological or maybe physical. It's much more than that, Kevin interrupted her. It's the result of years of manipulation by Olivia. Sarah felt Mark shift uneasily beside her. What do you mean? Olivia Al-Rashid is an extraordinary woman, Kevin continued, his tone now darker. She built an empire on the ruins my brother left behind. But to maintain that empire, she needed total control. And what better way to control the heir than by making him emotionally dependent? Are you saying that she did this to her own son? I'm saying that Olivia is a master of psychological manipulation. Since Ryan was a child, she convinced him that there was something wrong with him, something that needed to be fixed. Years of questionable therapies, unnecessary medications, always under the pretext of helping him. Sarah felt her stomach churn. Why? Power, Ms. Walker. As long as Ryan believes he's broken, that he needs to be fixed, he'll remain under her control. And through him, she controls the entire Al-Rashid empire. And where do I fit into all this? Sarah asked, though she feared the answer. You're an unexpected variable, Kevin replied, leaning forward. For the first time in years, Ryan is showing signs of independence. The marriage proposal wasn't just an act of desperation, as Olivia wants to make it seem. It was an act of rebellion. And that's good. It depends on your point of view, Kevin smiled enigmatically. For Olivia, it's a disaster. For me, it's an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Mark asked, speaking for the first time. The opportunity to free Ryan from Olivia's control, Kevin answered, to show him that there's nothing wrong with him, that there never was, that all of this was an elaborate manipulation to keep him under control. And how do you plan to do that? Sarah asked. With your help, Kevin answered simply. Olivia is right about one thing. You're different from the others. You see Ryan for who he is, not for what he should be, and that terrifies her. So your proposal is simple: marry Ryan, but not for the reason he thinks, not to fix him or keep up appearances. Marry him to help him free himself. Sarah felt her head spin. And why should I trust you? Because unlike Olivia, I'm not asking you to play a role. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, someone who sees beyond appearances, who doesn't judge, who accepts. This is madness, Mark muttered. This is the reality of the Al-Rashid family, Kevin corrected. A world where truth and lie mix so perfectly that it's impossible to distinguish one from the other. And if I accept? Sarah asked, ignoring Mark's alarmed look. What happens next? Olivia will lose her control over Ryan, and with that, her control over the Al-Rashid empire. The board of directors is already tired of her manipulations, but they need a reason to act. Your marriage to Ryan, if he discovers the truth about what his mother did, could be that reason. So you want to use Sarah as a pawn in your family power game? Mark asked, his voice laden with disapproval. No, Kevin answered, his eyes fixed on Sarah. I want to give her the chance to do what no one else has managed. Show Ryan that he doesn't need to be fixed, because he was never broken. A heavy silence fell over the room. Sarah got up, walking to the window. The sky was beginning to lighten slightly, the first signs of dawn painting the New York horizon. How long do I have to decide? She asked without turning around. Until tonight, Kevin answered, standing up. Olivia has organized a formal dinner at the plaza. That's where she intends to announce Ryan's engagement to the daughter of one of our major shareholders. Unless, of course, you show up with a different answer. He walked to the door but stopped before leaving. One last thing, Ms. Walker. If you decide to accept, you need to understand that there's no turning back. Olivia Al-Rashid is not the type of person who easily forgives those who challenge her power. After he left, Mark immediately turned to Sarah. You're not really considering this, are you? Sarah continued, looking out the window, watching New York wake up. What if he's telling the truth? What if Ryan really needs help? Mark approached, placing his hands on her shoulders. This is bigger than you. It's a family war for control of a billion-dollar empire. You could get hurt badly. I'm already involved, she answered softly. From the moment I looked into Ryan's eyes at the hotel, I was already involved. I just didn't know how much. The sun was beginning to rise over New York, its first golden lights reflecting off the waters of the East River. Somewhere in the city, Ryan Al-Rashid was probably also awake, carrying the weight of years of manipulation without even knowing it. And in a few hours, Sarah would need to make a decision that would change not only her life, but potentially the fate of an entire dynasty. Breakfast arrived in Sarah's room untouched. Mark had insisted on ordering, arguing that she needed to keep her strength up, but the mere idea of eating made her stomach churn. Kevin's words echoed in her mind, mixed with Olivia's insinuations and Ryan's hesitant confessions. You need to talk to him, Mark said, watching his friend walk restlessly around the room. To Ryan before making any decision. And say what? Sarah stopped in front of the mirror, observing the dark circles that were beginning to form under her eyes. Hey, your uncle showed up in the middle of the night to tell me your mother has been manipulating you your whole life. If necessary, yes, Mark responded firmly. He deserves to know. Sarah sighed, running her hands over her face. What if Kevin is lying? What if this is just part of some plan to take control of the company? There's only one way to find out. Mark picked up her cell phone from the table and held it out to her. Call him? With slightly trembling hands, Sarah dialed Ryan's number. After 3 rings, the call was answered, but not by the voice she expected to hear. Ms. Walker, Olivia's cold voice sounded from the other end of the line. What a pleasant surprise. Sarah felt her blood freeze. Mrs. Al-Rashid, I was trying to speak with Ryan. Ryan is unavailable at the moment, Olivia responded smoothly. Actually, I was about to call you. Would you like to join me for tea? There are some things we need to discuss. Sarah looked at Mark, who had moved closer to listen to the conversation. He made a negative gesture with his head, but Sarah knew she had no choice. Of course, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Where shall we meet? I'll send a car to pick you up in 15 minutes, Olivia replied, before hanging up. Don't go, Mark pleaded, as soon as she lowered the phone. This is getting more and more dangerous. I need to know the truth, Sarah responded, already walking to the closet to change. And maybe this is my only chance. Exactly 15 minutes later, a black limousine was waiting for Sarah at the hotel entrance. The journey was short, ending in front of a private mansion on Fifth Avenue, one of the most exclusive streets in New York. A housekeeper led her through corridors decorated with modern art to a stunning conservatory where Olivia Al-Rashid was waiting, impeccable in a Chanel suit. Sarah, dear, she smiled, indicating the chair across from her. I'm glad you could come. A fine China tea service was already set out, accompanied by small pastries that looked like works of art. Where's Ryan? Sarah asked as soon as she sat down. Straight to the point, Olivia smiled, serving the tea with precise movements. I admire that about you. Ryan is handling some important company matters. Actually, that's what I want to talk about. Sarah accepted the offered cup but didn't drink. About the company? About the future, Olivia corrected. Ryan's future. The future of the Al-Rashid family and by extension, your future too, if you choose to be part of it. So I still have a choice? We always have a choice, dear, Olivia replied, her penetrating eyes fixed on Sarah. The question is, are we prepared for the consequences of those choices? Sarah placed the cup on the table untouched. Why did you call me here, Mrs. Al-Rashid? Because, contrary to what my dear brother-in-law may have told you, I'm not a villain in this story, Olivia replied, surprising Sarah with her frankness. I'm just a mother trying to protect her son. Protect him from what? From himself, from people who want to use him for their own ends. Olivia paused significantly. From Kevin. Sarah felt her heart race. He visited my room last night. I know, Olivia replied calmly. Just as I know exactly what he told you. About how I supposedly manipulated Ryan, how I made him believe there was something wrong with him. And is there no truth to that? Olivia gracefully stood up, walking to a nearby shelf. From there, she took out a folder and handed it to Sarah. See for yourself. Inside the folder were medical reports, all dated from when Ryan was still a child. Diagnoses, treatments, psychological evaluations. Sarah skimmed through the documents, her heart tightening with each page. Ryan was born different, Olivia said softly. Not physically, but emotionally. From a young age, he had difficulty connecting with other people, expressing his feelings. The doctors tried everything, but nothing worked, Sarah completed, remembering Ryan's words at the Empire State Building. Exactly, Olivia sat back down. Kevin always saw this as a weakness that could be exploited. He never accepted that I, a woman, took control of the company after his brother's departure. To him, Ryan should be the leader, even if he wasn't prepared for it. And the treatments, the therapies, they were all recommended by the best specialists, Olivia replied. Not by me, as Kevin wants you to believe. All I did was try to protect my son from the world that awaited him. A world that doesn't accept differences, that doesn't tolerate weaknesses. Sarah flipped through a few more documents, her mind trying to process all the information. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand what's at stake. Olivia leaned forward, her voice softer now. Ryan doesn't need someone else trying to fix him or save him. He needs acceptance, understanding, and maybe you can give him that. But tonight's dinner, the arranged engagement, it's protection, Olivia explained. If Ryan marries someone from our society, someone who understands our traditions and accepts our peculiarities, he'll be protected. No one will question, no one will demand explanations. And if he marries me, then he'll be exposed. You're an outsider, Sarah. People will ask questions, demand explanations, and eventually the truth will come out. What truth? Sarah asked, though she feared the answer. That the heir to the Al-Rashid Empire can't... Olivia made a vague gesture with her hand. Our society isn't kind to that kind of difference. Sarah was silent for a long moment, observing the conservatory through the glass walls. The beauty of the place contrasted drastically with the complexity of the situation she found herself in. And if I don't care, she finally said, what if I accept Ryan exactly as he is? Then you're even more special than I thought, Olivia smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. But the question isn't whether you accept, Sarah. It's whether you're prepared for the consequences of that acceptance, for the comments, the looks, the insinuations. To see the man you love questioned and judged for something beyond his control. A sound of a door opening interrupted her. Sarah turned to see Ryan standing in the entrance of the conservatory, his face a mask of surprise and confusion. Sarah, what are you doing here? Ryan, darling, Olivia stood up to greet him. Sarah and I were having a very important conversation about the future. Ryan looked from his mother to Sarah, his dark eyes full of concern. What kind of conversation? Sarah stood up too, her heart beating hard against her ribs. It was time for the truth, for all the truths. About choices, she replied, keeping her eyes fixed on his. And about acceptance. Ryan approached slowly, his expression a mix of fear and hope. Sarah, No more secrets, Ryan, she interrupted gently. No more half-truths. I know everything. About your condition, about your mother's attempts to fix you, about Kevin's plans, and I'm still here. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because I love you, Sarah replied simply. Not despite your differences, but because of them. Because they make you who you are. And who you are is someone I want to spend my life with. Olivia watched the exchange silently, a mixture of emotions crossing her face. Finally, she spoke. Ryan, I owe you an apology. For years, I thought I was protecting you, but in reality, I was denying you the chance to be who you truly are. Sarah, she sees you, really sees you, and accepts you completely. Ryan looked at his mother, tears shining in his eyes. Mom, no, let me finish, Olivia continued. I've made many mistakes, but I won't make another one now. If Sarah is who you choose, if she's who makes you happy, then you have my full support. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Sarah felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about the Al-Rashids, about Ryan, about herself, had changed in the span of a few minutes. So what happens now? She finally asked. Ryan took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Now we face the world together. No more hiding, no more pretending, just us being who we truly are. It won't be easy, Olivia warned. The press, the society, our business partners, they'll all have questions, opinions. Let them, Ryan replied, a new strength in his voice. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of who I am, because I have someone who loves me completely. Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of love and pride. We'll face it all together. As they left the conservatory, Sarah caught a glimpse of Kevin slipping out a side door. His plans for taking control of the company had crumbled, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the simple revelation of truth and acceptance. That night at the charity gala, Sarah and Ryan danced slowly under the crystal chandeliers. She now wore one of the dresses Sophie had brought, a stunning model in shades of green that made her feel like a fairy tale princess. Happy? Ryan asked softly. More than I ever imagined possible, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Across the ballroom, Olivia was chatting animatedly with Mark, probably already planning the wedding details. The press present discreetly captured the moment, but now without the veracity of before. The true story had already been told. "You know," Sarah said, lifting her head to look into Ryan's eyes, "when I arrived in New York for that conference, I never imagined my life would change so much in just a few days. Any regrets?" "Not for a second," she smiled, "because I discovered that sometimes the best love stories aren't those from traditional fairy tales. They're the ones that teach us that true love is about acceptance, understanding, and the courage to be who we really are." Ryan kissed her softly, right there in the middle of the ballroom, not caring about the flashes that went off around them. Because now they knew, their love didn't need to fit into any pre-established mold. It was perfect exactly the way it was. And so, under the lights of New York, the city that never sleeps, Sarah and Ryan began their own fairy tale, not one of rescued princesses or perfect princes, but one of two people who found in mutual acceptance the purest form of love. As the night wore on, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind of events that had led her to this moment. Just a few days ago, she had been a simple teacher from Boston attending a conference in New York. Now she was dancing in the arms of one of the most eligible bachelors in the world, having just defied societal expectations and family manipulations. "What are you thinking about?" Ryan asked, noticing her distant look. "About how life can change in an instant," she replied. "About how sometimes the greatest adventures come from the most unexpected places." Ryan smiled, that genuine smile. That had become more frequent since their confrontation with Olivia. "And are you ready for this adventure, Sarah Thompson?" "With you?" "Always," she answered, tightening her arms around his neck. As they continued to dance, Sarah noticed the looks they were receiving. Some were curious, others disapproving, but many were filled with a sort of wonder. It was as if people were seeing a real-life fairy tale unfold before their eyes, not the kind with perfect princes and damsels in distress, but one of real people, with real struggles, finding love and acceptance against all odds. Olivia approached them, her face softer than Sarah had ever seen it. "Ryan, dear, the press is asking for a statement. Do you feel up to it?" Ryan looked at Sarah, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded encouragingly. "We'll do it together," he said, taking Sarah's hand. They made their way to a small stage that had been set up for announcements. Cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position as Ryan and Sarah stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," Ryan began, his voice steady. "I know there have been many questions and speculations about recent events. Tonight, I want to set the record straight." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "For years, I've lived under the weight of expectations. From my family, from society, from myself. I was made to believe that I was somehow broken, that I needed fixing. But the truth is, I'm not broken. I'm different, yes, but that difference is what makes me who I am." Sarah squeezed his hand supportively as he continued. "In Sarah, I've found someone who sees me for who I truly am. Someone who doesn't try to change me or fix me, but who loves me completely, differences and all. And in loving her, I've learned to love myself." The room was silent, hanging on every word. To those who might question our relationship, who might wonder how it fits into the expectations of our society or our business world, I say this: love doesn't need to fit into anyone's expectations. It just needs to be real, honest, and true. Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes as Ryan turned to look at her. "Sarah Thompson has agreed to be my wife, not because of my name or my wealth, not to fix me or change me, but simply because she loves me. And I love her, with every fiber of my being." The room erupted in applause. Even the most hardened reporters seemed moved by the raw honesty of Ryan's words. As they stepped down from the stage, they were immediately surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations. But Sarah noticed Olivia standing slightly apart, a complex mix of emotions on her face. "Go to her," Sarah whispered to Ryan. "She needs to hear from you." Ryan nodded, making his way through the crowd to his mother. Sarah watched as they embraced, years of misunderstanding and pain melting away in that moment of genuine connection. Mark appeared at Sarah's side, handing her a glass of champagne. "So how does it feel to be the future Mrs. Al-Rashid?" Sarah laughed, the sound bright and free. "Honestly, a little terrifying, but also right, like this is exactly where I'm meant to be." "You know," Mark said, his tone becoming serious, "when I warned you to be careful, I never imagined it would lead to this. But seeing you now, seeing how happy you both are, I think maybe this really is your fairy tale, S." Sarah hugged her friend tightly. "Thank you for being here through all of this. I couldn't have done it without you." As the night drew to a close, Sarah found herself back in Ryan's arms, swaying gently to the music. The ballroom had mostly emptied, with just a few stragglers remaining. "So what's next for us?" she asked, looking up into his eyes. "Well," Ryan smiled, "I was thinking we might need a bit of a break from all this excitement. How do you feel about a trip?" "A trip?" I was thinking Paris. It seems fitting, doesn't it? The city of love for a new beginning?" Sarah felt her heart swell with joy. "Paris sounds perfect." As they left the ballroom, hand in hand, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation for the future. She knew there would be challenges ahead, the press to deal with, a wedding to plan, a new life to navigate. But with Ryan by her side, accepted and loved for exactly who he was, she felt ready to face anything. Their love story might not have been conventional, might not have followed the rules of society or family expectations, but it was theirs, built on a foundation of honesty, acceptance, and the courage to be true to oneself. And as they stepped out into the New York night, the city lights twinkling like stars around them, Sarah knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. Because sometimes, the most beautiful love stories are the ones that teach us to embrace our differences, to find strength in vulnerability, and to love without conditions or expectations. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Ryan's story became a sensation. Magazines clamored for exclusive interviews, talk shows wanted them as guests, and social media buzzed with discussions about love, acceptance, and breaking societal norms. But through it all, Sarah and Ryan remained grounded in their love for each other. They decided to take a step back from the limelight, focusing instead on building their life together. Their trip to Paris was everything Sarah had dreamed of and more. They strolled hand in hand along the Seine, shared croissants in quaint cafes, and kissed atop the Eiffel Tower. But more than the romantic clichés, it was the quiet moments that Sarah treasured most. Watching Ryan sketch the city skyline, his face relaxed and happy, discussing books in the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, simply being together, free from expectations and judgments. One evening, as they sat in a small bistro in Montmartre, Ryan surprised her with a small velvet box. "I know we're already engaged," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "but I wanted to do this properly without any audience or pressure." Inside the box was a stunning ring, not the ostentatious diamond she might have expected from an Al-Rashid, but a delicate, vintage piece with a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Ryan explained. "She was the one person in my family who always accepted me as I was. I think she would have loved you." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as Ryan slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered. As they returned to New York, Sarah and Ryan faced the challenge of integrating their new relationship into their existing lives. The whirlwind romance in Paris had been like a dream, but now they had to navigate the realities of their different worlds colliding. Sarah's first day back at her elementary school was surreal. As she walked through the familiar hallways, she felt like a completely different person than the teacher who had left for a conference just a week ago. Her engagement ring glittered on her finger, drawing curious glances from her colleagues. "Sarah, is it true?" her friend and fellow teacher Jessica exclaimed as she burst into Sarah's classroom. "You're engaged to Ryan Al-Rashid?" Sarah couldn't help but smile. "It's true, it's been a whirlwind, but it feels right." Jessica's eyes widened. "But how? When? I need details." As Sarah recounted an abbreviated version of her Parisian romance, she could see the mix of excitement and concern in her friend's eyes. It was a look she was becoming familiar with, the same one Mark had given her when she called to tell him the news. "Are you sure about this?" Jessica asked gently. "I mean, it's all happened so fast." Sarah took a deep breath. I know it seems crazy, but Jessica, when I'm with Ryan, everything just makes sense. He sees me for who I am, and I see him. It's not about his money or his family. It's about two people who found each other against all odds. Jessica squeezed her hand. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters. But promise me you'll be careful, okay? The world Ryan comes from, it's different from ours. I know, Sarah nodded. Believe me, I know. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself struggling to focus on her lesson plans. Her mind kept drifting to Ryan, to the challenges they still faced. Olivia had been surprisingly supportive during their last days in Paris, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the matriarch of the Al-Rashid family was simply biding her time. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. Dinner tonight? There's someone I'd like you to meet. Sarah's heart raced. Who? My sister Layla. She just flew in from Dubai. She's eager to meet you. Sarah hesitated for a moment before replying, Of course. What time? As she put her phone away, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had heard Ryan mention his sister before, but always in passing. Layla Al-Rashid was something of an enigma, a successful businesswoman in her own right, but fiercely protective of her family. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. When the final bell rang, Sarah rushed home to change. She opted for a simple but elegant black dress, something that would hopefully strike the right balance between her world and Ryan's. Ryan's driver picked her up promptly at 7 p.m. As they wove through the New York traffic, Sarah tried to calm her nerves. She had faced Olivia Al-Rashid, after all. How much more intimidating could Layla be? The car pulled up to a discreet but clearly expensive restaurant in Tribeca. Ryan was waiting for her outside, looking as handsome as ever in a tailored suit. You look beautiful, he said, kissing her cheek. I'm nervous, Sarah admitted. Ryan squeezed her hand reassuringly. Don't be. Layla's going to love you. As they entered the restaurant, Sarah immediately spotted a striking woman sitting alone at a corner table. Layla Al-Rashid was the epitome of elegant sophistication. Her dark hair swept into a sleek updo, her designer dress perfectly tailored to her slim figure. Brother, Layla stood, embracing Ryan warmly, before turning her piercing gaze to Sarah. And you must be the woman who has turned our world upside down. Sarah swallowed hard. It's a pleasure to meet you, Layla. I've heard so much about you. Layla's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Funny, I've heard so little about you, until recently, that is. As they sat down, Sarah could feel Layla studying her intently. The waiter appeared with menus, but Sarah found she had little appetite. So Sarah, Layla began once they had ordered, tell me about yourself. How does a school teacher from New York end up engaged to one of the most eligible bachelors in the Middle East? Sarah took a sip of water, buying herself a moment to gather her thoughts. It wasn't planned, I can assure you. Ryan and I met at a conference in Paris. We connected in a way neither of us expected. Connected, Layla repeated, arching an eyebrow. And in just a few days you decided to commit to a lifelong partnership, to enter a world so different from your own? Layla, Ryan's voice held a note of warning. It's all right, Sarah said, meeting Layla's gaze steadily. I understand your skepticism, but what Ryan and I have, it's real. It's not about his world or mine, it's about us. Layla leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. You seem very sure for someone who's known my brother for such a short time. I am sure, Sarah replied, surprising herself with her conviction. I know it's unconventional. I know many people will question our decision. But I love Ryan and I'm committed to building a life with him, whatever challenges that might bring. For a long moment, Layla said nothing. Then slowly, a genuine smile spread across her face. Well, I can see why Ryan is so taken with you. You've got spirit, Sarah. The tension at the table eased slightly. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself warming to Layla. Beneath her intimidating exterior was a sharp wit and a deep love for her brother. By the time dessert arrived, they were laughing together over Ryan's childhood mishaps. As they were preparing to leave, Layla pulled Sarah aside. "I apologize if I seemed harsh earlier," she said quietly. "You have to understand, Ryan is special. We've always been protective of him." Sarah nodded. "I know. And I promise you, Layla, I only want what's best for him." Layla studied her for a moment longer before saying, "I believe you, but Sarah, you need to be prepared. The world you're entering, it's not always kind. There will be people who question your motives, who will try to tear you apart. Are you ready for that?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't know if anyone can ever be truly ready for something like that, but I know that what Ryan and I have is worth fighting for. Whatever comes our way, we'll face it together." Layla nodded approvingly. "Good, because I have a feeling you're going to need that strength in the coming days." As they said their goodbyes, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Layla's words were more than just a general warning. There was something in her tone, a hint of knowledge of things to come. In the car ride back to her apartment, Sarah snuggled close to Ryan. "Your sister is intense," she said. Ryan chuckled. "That's putting it mildly. But she liked you, I could tell." "I hope so," Sarah murmured. "Ryan, what did Layla mean about needing strength in the coming days?" Ryan was quiet for a moment. "I'm not entirely sure," he finally said. "But Sarah, there's something you need to know. The board of Al Rashid Corporation is meeting next week. They're discussing the future of the company's leadership." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Because of us?" "Partially," Ryan admitted. "Our engagement has raised some questions about my ability to lead the company. Some board members are pushing for a more traditional approach." "What does that mean?" Ryan sighed. "It means we might be facing some difficult decisions very soon. But Sarah, no matter what happens, I want you to know that you're my priority. We'll get through this together." As the car pulled up to her building, Sarah felt a mix of love and trepidation. She knew their journey was far from over. The fairy tale romance in Paris had been just the beginning. Now they faced the real test. Navigating the complex world of family expectations, corporate politics, and societal pressures. But as Ryan kissed her goodnight, his touch still sending shivers down her spine, Sarah knew one thing for certain. Whatever challenges lay ahead, their love was worth fighting for. Together, they would write their own story, one of acceptance, understanding, and the courage to be true to themselves no matter what the world might say. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. Groggily, she reached for it, her eyes widening as she saw the flood of notifications. Missed calls from her parents, texts from friends, and dozens of news alerts. Her heart racing, she opened one of the news articles. The headline made her blood run cold. Al Rashid Heirs engagement sparks corporate crisis. Board calls emergency meeting. As she scrolled through the article, Sarah felt a growing sense of dread. The story painted their engagement as a scandal, questioning Ryan's judgment and fitness to lead the company. There were quotes from anonymous board members expressing concern about the hasty decision and the potential impact on the company's image. Before she could process it all, her phone rang. It was Ryan. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." His voice was strained. "I didn't think they'd leak it to the press so quickly." "Ryan, what's going on?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The article says the board is considering removing you from your position." There was a heavy sigh on the other end. "It's complicated. Some members of the board, led by my uncle Karim, are using our engagement as an excuse to push for changes in leadership. They're claiming that my impulsive decision shows I'm not ready to take over as CEO." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "This is all my fault if I hadn't—" "No," Ryan interrupted firmly. "This is not your fault, Sarah. This is about power and control. Our engagement just gave them the excuse they were looking for. What can we do?" "I'm flying back to Dubai tonight for the emergency board meeting," Ryan said. "I need to face this head-on." Sarah hesitated before asking, Do you want me to come with you?" There was a pause on the other end. "Sarah, I love you, and I want nothing more than to have you by my side. But I think it might be better if you stay in New York for now, at least until we see how this plays out." Despite understanding his reasoning, Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of hurt. "Okay," she said softly, "if you think that's best." "It's not about what I want," Ryan said, his voice gentle. "It's about protecting you from the media circus that's about to descend on Dubai. I promise as soon as things settle down, we'll face this together." After they hung up, Sarah sat on her bed, feeling overwhelmed. This was the reality of being with Ryan Al Rashid, a world where personal decisions became front-page news, where love had to contend with corporate politics and family dynasties. She was about to call Mark for advice when there was a knock at her door. Puzzled, Sarah went to answer it, gasping in surprise when she saw who was on the other side. Olivia Al Rashid stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed as always, flanked by two discreet but clearly professional security guards. "Mrs. Al Rashid," Sarah stammered, "What are you doing here?" Olivia's face was a mask of calm determination. "We need to talk, Sarah. May I come in?" Feeling like she was in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, Sarah stepped aside to let them enter. As Olivia settled gracefully onto Sarah's worn couch, looking utterly out of place in the modest apartment, Sarah couldn't help but feel that this conversation was going to change everything. "I assume you've seen the news," Olivia began without preamble. Sarah nodded, sinking into the armchair across from her. "Yes, it's not good." "It's a disaster," Olivia corrected, her voice sharp. "Years of careful planning and positioning, all jeopardized because my son couldn't control his impulses." Sarah felt a flare of anger. "With all due respect, Mrs. Al Rashid, our engagement is not an impulse. Ryan and I love each other." "Yes, I'm sure you believe that," Olivia interrupted. "But Sarah, you must understand the world Ryan comes from. Love is a luxury we often can't afford, especially not when it threatens everything we've built." "So what are you saying?" Sarah asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I'm saying that you have a choice to make, a choice that will affect not just your life or Ryan's, but the lives of thousands of people who depend on Al Rashid Corporation for their livelihoods." Sarah felt her heart pounding. What kind of choice? "End the engagement," Olivia said simply. "Walk away now before things get even more complicated. If you do, I can ensure that Ryan retains his position, that the company remains stable. And if I don't?" Olivia's expression hardened. "Then you need to be prepared for a fight unlike anything you've ever experienced. The board, the media, our entire society will be against you. Are you ready to put Ryan through that? To watch him lose everything he's worked for?" Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. "You're asking me to break his heart." "I'm asking you to save his future," Olivia corrected. "To save the future of thousands of employees who rely on Al Rashid Corporation. Sometimes, Sarah, true love means being willing to let go." As Olivia stood to leave, she placed a business card on the coffee table. "Take some time to think about it. When you're ready to make the right decision, call this number. We'll make sure the breakup is handled discreetly." After Olivia left, Sarah sat in stunned silence, staring at the business card. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: love for Ryan, fear of the challenges ahead, and a growing sense of doubt. Was Olivia right? Was walking away the most loving thing she could do? Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Landing in Dubai. Wish you were here. I love you." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she realized the magnitude of the decision before her. Stay and fight for their love, potentially costing Ryan everything he'd worked for? Or walk away, saving his career but shattering both their hearts? As the New York sky darkened outside her window, Sarah knew that the fairy tale romance she had fallen into in Paris was about to face its greatest test. And the choice she made would determine not just her future, but the future of the man she loved and the empire he was destined to lead. With shaking hands, Sarah picked up her phone. She had a decision to make, and the weight of it felt almost unbearable. But as she looked at the engagement ring sparkling on her finger, she knew that whatever choice she made, it had to come from a place of love, not fear. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and indecision for Sarah. She went through the motions at school, trying to focus on her students, but her mind was constantly pulled back to the impossible choice before her. Ryan called every night from Dubai, his voice a mixture of determination and weariness as he updated her on the board meetings. "It's not looking good," he admitted on their third night of long-distance calls. "Karim has rallied significant support. They're questioning everything. My judgment, my readiness to lead, even my ability to produce an heir." Sarah felt her cheeks flush at the implication. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. This is all because of me." "No," he said firmly. "This is because of people who are afraid of change, who can't see beyond their own narrow views of what a leader should be. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me, Sarah. Don't ever doubt that." His words, meant to reassure, only made Sarah's heart ache more. How could she even consider walking away from this man who loved her so completely? But then, Olivia's words would echo in her mind, reminding her of the thousands of lives that could be affected by their decision to stay together. On Friday afternoon, as Sarah was packing up her classroom for the weekend, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Time's running out. Make the right choice. Oh." Sarah's hands shook as she deleted the message. She couldn't take it anymore. She needed advice, perspective, someone who could help her see clearly through the emotional fog she was in. Without really thinking about it, she found herself driving to Mark's apartment. Her friend answered the door, took one look at her, tear-stained face, and immediately pulled her into a hug. "Oh, S," he said softly. "Come on in. I'll make us some tea." Sitting on Mark's comfortable couch, a steaming mug of chamomile tea warming her hands, Sarah felt some of the tension leave her body. Mark settled into the armchair across from her, his own mug cradled between his palms. "All right, spill," he said gently. "What's got you looking like you've seen a ghost?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. It's all so much, Mark. Everything's happening so fast. One minute I'm just a teacher from New York, and the next I'm engaged to one of the most powerful men in the Middle East." Mark nodded, his expression a mix of concern and understanding. "And how do you feel about that?" "Honestly, terrified," Sarah admitted. "Excited too, but mostly terrified. Ryan's world is so different from mine. His mother, his family, the expectations. It's overwhelming. Have you talked to Ryan about this?" Mark asked, leaning forward slightly. Sarah nodded. "He says he loves me for who I am, that I don't need to change. But Mark, you should have seen the way people looked at me at that charity dinner, like I was some kind of oddity. And Olivia, Ryan's mother. Yes, she's intense. One minute she's accepting me, the next it feels like she's trying to mold me into someone else entirely." Mark was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea thoughtfully. "S, you know I'll support you no matter what, but I have to ask, are you sure about this? Are you ready for everything that comes with marrying Ryan?" Sarah stared into her mug, watching the steam rise in lazy spirals. "I love him, Mark, more than I thought possible. And when it's just us, everything feels right. But then reality crashes in and I start to doubt what? Everything, whether I'm strong enough for this, whether our love is enough to overcome all the obstacles, whether I'm making the biggest mistake of my life or embarking on the greatest adventure." Mark set his mug down and leaned forward, taking Sarah's free hand in his. "Listen to me, S. You are one of the strongest, most amazing people I know. If anyone can handle this, it's you. But you need to be sure, really sure, because once you're in, there's no going back." Sarah squeezed his hand gratefully. "I know. That's why I'm here, I guess. I needed a reality check. Someone to remind me who I am." "And who are you, Sarah Johnson?" She smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'm a teacher from New York who somehow fell in love with a prince of industry. I'm scared but excited. I'm out of my depth but determined to swim. And I'm not going to let anyone, not Olivia, not the press, not society, tell me who I should be." Mark grinned. "That's my girl. Now, what's the plan?" Sarah took a deep breath. "First, I need to talk to Ryan, really talk. About everything, my fears, my hopes, what our future looks like. Then I guess we face the world together." "Sounds like a solid plan," Mark nodded approvingly. "And remember, I'm here if you need anything." even if it's just a cup of tea and a sympathetic ear." Sarah set her mug down and hugged her friend tightly. "What would I do without you?" "Probably make much worse fashion choices," Mark teased, lightening the mood. As Sarah left Mark's apartment an hour later, she felt more centered, more like herself. The challenges ahead were still daunting, but she felt ready to face them. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "Missing you. Dinner at our place tonight? We need to talk." Sarah smiled, typing back quickly. "Definitely, I have a lot to say too, love you." Walking through the bustling streets of New York, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was Sarah Johnson, soon to be Sarah Al-Rashid, and she was going to write her own fairy tale on her own terms. The penthouse apartment Ryan had recently purchased as their New York home was a stark contrast to Sarah's modest teacher's apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, the city sprawling beyond, in a glittering tapestry of lights. Sarah found Ryan in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, attempting to cook what smelled like a passable attempt at pasta primavera. The sight of him, powerful business mogul turned adorably flustered chef, made her heart swell with affection. "Need some help there, Iron Chef?" she teased, dropping her bag and moving to kiss him hello. Ryan's face lit up at her arrival. "I thought I'd try my hand at cooking for once. It's not going as smoothly as running a multinational corporation." Sarah laughed, rolling up her own sleeves. "Here, let me show you a trick or two." As they worked side by side in the kitchen, the tension that had been building since their return from Paris began to dissipate. This was them, Ryan and Sarah, two people who loved each other, figuring things out together. Over dinner, seated at the elegant dining table that still felt too grand for Sarah's tastes, they finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I talked to my mother today," Ryan began, his voice careful. "She's adjusting to the idea of us. It's not easy for her." Sarah nodded, pushing a piece of asparagus around her plate. "I can imagine. I'm not exactly the daughter-in-law she had in mind." "No, you're not," Ryan agreed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You're so much more. Sarah, I need you to know that I don't want you to change who you are. Not for my mother, not for the company, not for anyone. Even if who I am might cause problems for you. For the business?" Sarah asked, voicing one of her deepest fears. Ryan's grip on her hand tightened. "Especially then. Sarah, do you know why I fell in love with you?" She shook her head, waiting. "Because you saw me. Not Ryan Al-Rashid, heir to a fortune and a legacy. Just me, flaws, quirks, and all. You accepted me as I am, and that's worth more than any business deal or social standing." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "I'm scared, Ryan," she admitted. "Your world is so different from mine. I don't know if I'm cut out for it." "My world needs more people like you," Ryan said earnestly. "People with compassion, with a different perspective. You don't have to fit into my world, Sarah. We'll create our own." Sarah took a deep breath. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll always be honest with each other, no matter what. Even if it's hard, even if it might hurt. I need to know that amidst all the craziness, you and I will always have the truth." Ryan stood, pulling Sarah to her feet and into his arms. "I promise. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Just us, facing whatever comes together." As they stood there, the New York skyline twinkling behind them, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Ryan by her side, she was ready to face it. "So," Ryan said after a moment, a mischievous glint in his eye, "when do you want to start planning the wedding of the century?" Sarah groaned, burying her face in his chest. "Can't we just elope?" Ryan laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I don't think my mother's heart could take it, but how about we start small, a date, a rough idea of what we both want?" Sarah nodded, pulling back to look up at him. "Okay, but I have one non-negotiable demand. Name it." "Mark gets to be my man of honor." Ryan grinned. "Done. As long as you don't let him plan the bachelor party. I've heard stories about his wild side." As they laughed together, Sarah felt the last of her doubts melt away. This was right. This was where she belonged. Not because it was easy or perfect, but because it was real. And real love, she was learning, was worth fighting for. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. News of their engagement had leaked to the press, and suddenly Sarah found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never anticipated. Paparazzi camped outside her school, forcing her to take a leave of absence for the safety of her students. Her social media accounts exploded with followers, a mix of well-wishers and critics alike. Through it all, Ryan was her rock. He hired a top-notch PR team to manage the media frenzy, ensuring that Sarah's privacy was protected as much as possible. He also insisted on personal security for her, a concept that took some getting used to. "I feel ridiculous," Sarah complained one afternoon as they attempted to have a quiet lunch at a small cafe. Two discreet but obvious security guards stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye. "I'm a teacher, not a celebrity." "You're my fiancé," Ryan said gently. "Which makes you a target whether we like it or not. Please, just humor me on this one." Sarah sighed but nodded. She was learning to pick her battles. The real challenge came when Olivia arrived in New York, ostensibly to help with wedding planning, but clearly to assess the situation firsthand. The three of them sat in Ryan's penthouse, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them, as Olivia's eyes darted around the space, taking in every detail. "So," Olivia finally said, her voice carefully neutral, "have you given any thought to the ceremony? The Al-Rashid family has certain traditions that must be observed." Sarah glanced at Ryan, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Actually, Mrs. Al-Rashid—" "Olivia, please," Ryan's mother interrupted. "We're family now, after all." Sarah nodded, steeling herself. "Olivia, Ryan and I have been talking and we have some ideas of our own. We'd like to blend traditions, honoring the Al-Rashid heritage while also incorporating elements that are meaningful to me and my family." Olivia's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see, and what sort of elements did you have in mind?" "Well, for starters, I'd like the ceremony to be interfaith," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "My family is Christian, and while I respect the Islamic traditions of Ryan's family, I want my beliefs represented too." Ryan jumped in, his voice firm. "We've already spoken to an imam who's willing to work with a Christian minister to create a ceremony that honors both faiths." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "You understand, of course, that this is highly unconventional. There will be those who object." "With all due respect, Olivia," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness, "our entire relationship is unconventional. We're not looking to please everyone. We're looking to start our marriage in a way that's true to who we are." A tense silence fell over the room. Sarah held her breath, waiting for Olivia's reaction. To her surprise, a small smile tugged at the older woman's lips. "You're not at all what I expected, Sarah," Olivia said, her tone softer than before. "But I'm beginning to see why my son loves you so much. Your strength, your conviction, they remind me of myself at your age." Sarah blinked, taken aback by the unexpected compliment. "Thank you," she said softly. Olivia straightened, her businesslike demeanor returning. "Very well, an interfaith ceremony it is. Now about the guest list." As they delved into the details of planning what was shaping up to be a truly unique wedding, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She caught Ryan's eye across the table, saw the pride and love shining there, and knew that together they could face anything. The next few months were a blur of wedding preparations, media management, and navigating the complex dynamics of merging two very different worlds. Sarah threw herself into learning about Ryan's culture and family history, determined to honor his heritage while staying true to her own. One particularly memorable afternoon found Sarah and Mark poring over wedding magazines in her apartment, surrounded by fabric swatches and flower samples. "Okay, but hear me out," Mark said, holding up a page featuring an over-the-top crystal-encrusted gown. "You could blind the paparazzi with all these sparkles, self-defense and fashion in one." Sarah laughed, tossing a pillow at her friend. "I think we'll stick with Plan A. Simple, elegant, with just a touch of both cultures." Mark's expression softened. "You're really doing this, huh? Marrying your Prince Charming?" "He's hardly a prince," Sarah protested, but she was smiling. So yes, I really am. "I'm proud of you, you know," Mark said, uncharacteristically serious. "You haven't let all this craziness change who you are. You're still my S." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Always," she promised, pulling him into a tight hug. As the big day approached, the media frenzy reached fever pitch. Everyone, it seemed, had an opinion on the upcoming Al Rashid Johnson wedding. Business analysts speculated on how it would affect the company. Fashion critics debated what the bride would wear. Cultural commentators argued over the significance of the interfaith ceremony. Through it all, Sarah and Ryan remained, focused on what really mattered, their love for each other and the life they were building together. They had their share of arguments, over everything from guest list politics to where they would live after the wedding, but they always came back to the promise they'd made that night in the penthouse. Honesty, always. The night before the wedding, Sarah stood on the balcony of her hotel suite, looking out over the twinkling lights of New York. Tomorrow, she would become Sarah Al-Rashid, wife to one of the most powerful men in the world. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. Expecting Mark or perhaps her mother, she was surprised to find Olivia standing there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "May I come in?" Ryan's mother asked. Sarah nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. Olivia walked to the center of the room, then turned to face Sarah, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I owe you an apology," Olivia said softly. Sarah blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For doubting you. For trying to change you. For not seeing from the beginning what my son saw. A remarkable woman who loves him for who he is, not what he represents." Olivia reached into her purse, pulling out a small velvet box. "I brought you something. It's tradition in our family for the mother of the groom to give the bride a gift on the eve of her wedding." She opened the box, revealing a stunning pair of pearl earrings. "These were given to me by Ryan's grandmother on my wedding day. I'd like you to have them." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Olivia, I don't know what to say. They're beautiful. They represent the wisdom of the past," Olivia said, gently placing the box in Sarah's hands. "But you, my dear, represent the promise of the future. A future where love knows no boundaries, where tradition and progress can coexist. I'm honored to welcome you to our family." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she hugged her soon-to-be mother-in-law. In that moment, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the universe itself was smiling on the union of Sarah and Ryan. The ceremony, held in a beautiful garden overlooking the Hudson River, was everything they had hoped for. A perfect blend of two cultures, two faiths, two lives becoming one. Sarah, radiant in a gown that combined Western elegance with subtle nods to Middle Eastern design, felt her heart swell as she walked down the aisle. Ryan, handsome in a tuxedo, accented with traditional Arabic elements, beamed at her with eyes, full of love and pride. As they exchanged vows, first in English, then in Arabic, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was right. This was where she belonged. The reception that followed was a joyous celebration of love and unity. Sarah watched in amusement as her small-town relatives mingled with Ryan's well-heeled business associates. Mark, true to form, had the dance floor packed within minutes of the music starting. As the night wore on, Sarah found a quiet moment alone with Ryan on a secluded balcony. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them gazing out at the starlit sky. "Happy, Mrs. Al-Rashid," he murmured in her ear. Sarah turned in his arms, reaching up to caress his cheek. "Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Al-Rashid." As they shared a tender kiss, Sarah knew that their journey was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but together they could face anything. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and Ryan split their time between New York and Dubai as they planned their wedding and navigated the complex world of merging their lives and careers. Sarah threw herself into learning about Ryan's business empire, determined to be an equal partner both personally and professionally. She was amazed by the scope of the Al-Rashid Corporation's charitable work, especially their educational initiatives in developing countries. "I want to head up the education division," she told Ryan. One evening, as they pored over reports in his home office, I think my background as a teacher could really make a difference. Ryan looked up from his laptop, a proud smile on his face. I think that's a brilliant idea. Your passion for education is one of the things I love most about you. But not everyone was as supportive of Sarah's new role. At a board meeting in Dubai, Sarah could feel the skeptical looks from some of the older members as she presented her ideas for expanding their scholarship programs. With all due respect, Miss Thompson, one gruff executive interrupted, what does an American school teacher know about running a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation? Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but before she could respond, Ryan's voice cut through the tension. Sarah brings a unique perspective and hands-on experience that will be invaluable to our efforts, he said firmly. I trust her judgment implicitly, as should we all. The executive backed down, but Sarah knew she would have to work twice as hard to prove herself. Meanwhile, wedding plans were in full swing. Sarah had initially balked at the idea of a lavish affair, but she soon realized how important it was to Ryan's family and their social standing. Just promise me we can slip away for a private ceremony first, she told Ryan as they looked over seating charts one evening. Something small and intimate, just for us. Ryan's eyes softened as he pulled her close. Anything for you, my love, as long as I get to call you my wife. The rest is just details. They decided on a private ceremony in Central Park with just Mark and Olivia as witnesses, followed by a grand reception in Dubai for family and business associates. As the big day approached, Sarah found herself caught up in a flurry of fittings, tastings, and etiquette lessons. Olivia had insisted on hiring an expert to teach Sarah the finer points of high society entertaining. You'll be expected to host galas and charity events, Olivia explained. It's crucial that you know how to navigate these waters. Sarah tried not to feel overwhelmed, reminding herself that this was all part of loving Ryan. Still, there were moments when she longed for the simplicity of her old life. One afternoon, feeling particularly stressed after a tense meeting with the wedding planner, Sarah snuck away to her old neighborhood in Brooklyn. She found herself outside her former school, watching children play at recess. Miss Thompson? A small voice called out. Sarah turned to see Emily, one of her former students, beaming up at her. Emily, look how much you've grown, Sarah exclaimed, kneeling down to hug the little girl. Are you coming back to teach us? Emily asked hopefully. Sarah felt a pang in her heart. Not right now, sweetie, but I'm working on something very special that I hope will help lots of kids like you. As she walked back to the waiting car, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, her life had changed dramatically, but at her core she was still the same Sarah who wanted to make a difference in children's lives. That evening, she shared her experience with Ryan. I want to start a program to bring top-notch education resources to underfunded schools, she said excitedly. We could partner with tech companies to provide tablets and learning software, train teachers in the latest methods. Ryan listened intently, his eyes shining with admiration. This is exactly why I fell in love with you, he said softly. Your passion, your drive to help others. We'll make it happen, Sarah. Together. As their wedding day dawned, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her simple white dress, ready for their private ceremony. Mark knocked gently on the door. You ready, S? He asked, a hint of emotion in his voice. Sarah took a deep breath, thinking of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a chance meeting in a New York hotel to the brink of a new life that she never could have imagined. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady and sure. As she walked towards Ryan in the dappled sunlight of Central Park, Sarah knew that while their love story might not be conventional, it was perfectly, beautifully theirs, and together they were ready to write the next chapter. The intimate ceremony in Central Park was everything Sarah had dreamed of. As they exchanged vows under a canopy of autumn leaves, with only Mark and Olivia as witnesses, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. This moment, this promise was the foundation of their life together. I, Ryan, take you, Sarah, to be my wife. Ryan's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. I promise to love and accept you exactly as you are for all of our days. Sarah's voice trembled slightly. As she repeated her own vows, the emotion of the moment overwhelming her. As Ryan slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, this love would be their anchor. The kiss they shared was sweet and tender, a private moment of joy before they would step into the public eye as husband and wife. "I love you, Mrs. Al-Rashid," Ryan whispered, his forehead resting against hers. Sarah smiled, her heart full. "I love you too, Mr. Al-Rashid." The next day, they boarded the Al-Rashid private jet for Dubai, where the grand reception awaited. Sarah tried to calm her nerves as she thought about the hundreds of guests, many of whom were influential business and political figures. "Remember, you're not just marrying Ryan," Olivia had told her during one of their many preparation sessions. "You're marrying into a legacy, a responsibility." As they descended into Dubai, the city's futuristic skyline glittering in the desert, "Son," Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. But when she looked at Ryan, saw the love and confidence in his eyes, she knew she was ready to face whatever came their way. The reception was a dazzling affair, held in the ballroom of the Burj Al Arab, the iconic sail-shaped hotel that dominated Dubai's coastline. Sarah's breath caught as she entered on Ryan's arm, taking in the opulent decorations, the sea of designer gowns and jewels, the expectant faces turned towards them. "Ready," Ryan whispered, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. Sarah nodded, straightening her shoulders. Her gown, a masterpiece of silk and intricate beadwork, rustled softly as they made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes. She was introduced to a blur of faces, business associates, distant relatives, political figures. Sarah did her best to remember names and titles, to engage in the kind of small talk expected in these circles. "You're doing wonderfully," Olivia murmured as she passed by, giving Sarah an approving nod. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself growing more comfortable in her new role. She chatted easily with the wife of a prominent sheikh about their shared interest in education reform, and managed to charm a gruff Russian oligarch with her knowledge of classic literature. Ryan beamed with pride as he watched her navigate the room. "You were born for this," he told her during a rare moment alone, but not everyone was as impressed. Sarah overheard snippets of conversation throughout the night, whispers of doubt about her suitability as Ryan's wife. "An American? School teacher? What could she possibly know about our world? I give it a year before he tires of her." Sarah tried not to let the comments bother her, focusing instead on the warmth of Ryan's hand in hers, the love she saw reflected in his eyes every time he looked at her. As the reception wound down, Ryan led Sarah out onto a private balcony, overlooking the Arabian Gulf. The warm night air was heavy with the scent of jasmine, and in the distance the lights of the city twinkled like earthbound stars. "How are you feeling?" Ryan asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Sarah leaned back against him, letting out a long breath. "Overwhelmed," she admitted, "but also excited. This is all so much bigger than I ever imagined, Ryan. The things we could do, the lives we could change." Ryan turned her gently to face him. "That's why I love you," he said softly. "You see beyond the glitter and the wealth. You see the potential for good." They shared a tender kiss, the sounds of the party fading away until it was just the two of them, standing on the edge of their new life together. The weeks following the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah threw herself into her new role with enthusiasm, determined to make a real difference through the Al-Rashid Foundation. She spent long hours poring over reports, meeting with education experts, and developing a comprehensive plan to revolutionize their approach to global education initiatives. Ryan watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're working too hard," he told her one evening as she paced their penthouse, deep in conversation with a contact in Kenya. Sarah waved him off, but after she hung up, she sank onto the couch with a sigh. "There's just so much to do," she said. "So many children who need help." Ryan sat beside her, pulling her close. "I know, my love, and we will help them. But you need to pace yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint." Sarah nodded, realizing he was right. She had been pushing herself to the limit, partly out of passion for the work, but also to prove to everyone, including herself, that she deserved her new position. The next day, Sarah decided to take a break and explore Dubai on her own. As she wandered through the winding alleys of the old souk, breathing in the heady scents of spices and incense, she felt some of her tension melt away. She stopped to admire a display of intricate gold jewelry, marveling at the craftsmanship. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Sarah turned to see an older Emirati woman, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled. "It's exquisite," Sarah agreed. The woman studied her for a moment. "You're the American girl who married Ryan al-Rashid, aren't you?" Sarah nodded, bracing herself for judgment or criticism, but the woman's smile only grew warmer. "I knew Ryan's grandmother," she said. "She too was an outsider who married into the family. Many thought she would never adapt, never understand our ways. But she brought a fresh perspective, new ideas. She helped shape the al-Rashid legacy into what it is today." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you for sharing that," she said softly. The woman patted her arm gently. "Remember, my dear, a tree with roots in two soils grows stronger than most." As Sarah made her way back to the car, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, she was an outsider in many ways, but perhaps that was exactly what the al-Rashid family and their foundation needed. That evening, as she and Ryan enjoyed a quiet dinner on their balcony, Sarah shared her encounter in the souk. "She's right, you know," Ryan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Your unique perspective is invaluable. You see things that those of us who have grown up in this world might miss." Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. "We make a good team, don't we?" "The best," Ryan agreed, his eyes shining with affection. As they sat there, the lights of Dubai twinkling around them, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The path ahead might not always be easy, but with Ryan by her side and with the strength of her own convictions, she was ready to face whatever challenges came their way. She thought back to that fateful day in New York, when a chance encounter had set her life on an entirely new course. If someone had told her then where she would end up, she might not have believed them. But now, looking at the man she loved, thinking of the work they were doing together, Sarah knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The coming years would bring triumphs and setbacks, moments of doubt and moments of pure joy. But through it all, Sarah and Ryan's love would remain a constant, a beacon guiding them through the complexities of their shared life. And as for Sarah, the girl from Brooklyn, who had once thought her greatest adventure would be shaping young minds in a classroom, she was only just beginning to discover the true extent of her potential and the incredible journey that lay ahead. As the warm Dubai night enveloped them, Sarah raised her glass in a quiet toast. "To us," she said softly, "and to all the adventures yet to come." Ryan clinked his glass against hers, his eyes full of love and promise. "To us," he echoed, "always."